culture. That's why it takes a lot of time. So, ayun, recording. Hello, I'm still on board. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you have to. I have to check every now and then kasi may mga nagpa-flash dito sa aking screen na daw yung internet ko daw ay nag-slow down. Anyway, so itong anthropology at home na, itong ethnography at home na ibibigay ko na dalawa ay parehong limited type. Hindi ito yung broad scope ethnography dahil nakafocus lamang ito on particular local cultural issues in Iraq, Catanduanes, and they involve relatively short periods of time to do. Siguro yung isa ginawa ko lang in 2 months. Okay na, tapos na. Hindi kasama doon yung writing. Now, ang isa pang commonality dito sa dalawang bibigay kong case study ay yung ethnographer, ako, I am my own informant. This is something that is not typically done by anthropologists, wherein you yourself, you become your own informant. But when you do ethnography at home, ganito ang nangyayari. Ikaw mismo nagiging source of data, nagiging informant. Lalong-lalo na yung pangalawa kong study, mamaya-maya i-present ko. Practically, I drew data mostly from my own experience. Hindi ako masyado nag-interview kasi nga ginamit ko na yung mga knowledge ko na na-pick up from other people in the course of me being somebody from Iraq who lived there and grew up there. Now, itong dalawang, another thing about these 2 studies that I'm going to present is that both of them touched on the issue of identity. So mamaya-maya, I'll be elaborating more of that. And then, isa pa, nakatangian ng dalawang ito ay yung both of these case studies are keen on the historical context of culture. Let me give a little more explanation. In the traditional ethnography, meron tayong tinatawag na ethnographic present, or sometimes they call it ethnographic cut. Parang ang ginagawa ng ethnographer, pupunta sa isang lugar and makes he makes this assumption na nag-freeze yung culture, hindi nag-change. Parang fini-freeze niya yung culture, parang kinukuha na niya ng snapshot, frozen. It's an eternal present. Kaya pag gumawa ang ethnographer ng kanyang write-up, naka-present tense lahat. Kasi as if everything is going on like it did before and it's not changing. So parang kumuha ka ng isang slice ng buhay ng mga tao. Ini-slice mo sa time flow. Freeze mo yung time. Sabi mo parang, teka, freeze mo na kayong lahat at mag-research ako. Wala mo nang babaguhin sa culture niyo, ha? Yan. Parang ganon dati. No? Assumption yan ng ethnographic method na parang fini-freeze mo. Or sometimes you call it ethnographic cut. Kinakat mo yung flow ng history. And then sabi mo sa sarili mo, I am trying to describe culture as it is, as I have found it. Pero me personally as an anthropologist, I have some reservation about this assumption because I take in a lot of the history. Kasi ang assumption ko, ang culture hindi pwedeng tumigil patuloy itong tumatakbo. Even as we speak, yung kultura ay nagbabago. Kaya, to understand the culture, you have to look into the past. You have always to look into how that culture came to be. So, kaya yung mga ginagawa kong ethnographic research, hindi lang itong dalawang to, pati na yung iba kong nagawa dati, ay malakas yung context ng history. So yun, no? Yan po yung mga katangian itong dalawang studies na to na i-present ko ngayon. Okay, so let me teka, di naghihiwas. Para nag-freeze itong aking bakit nag-freeze yata itong aking ano?
Yung arrow, Dr.
Yeah.
Click on the arrow.
Ayaw mag-anong arrow ko.
You can use your cursor.
Okay. 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 Sandali. Okay. That's it. Okay. So, let me start with the first. I understand that medyo late yata ako nakapag-submit, but I understand that copies, ma'am, had been distributed of the articles.
Yes, I have posted your articles sa isang link for the participants, Dr.
Okay. Yeah. So, i-assume na lang natin na nabasa na ng ating mga participants. Although, ipipresent ko yung findings and so on, pero hindi ganun kadetalyado. I don't think we have enough time for that. I'll just be tackling the main points. So, the first study is called Pantomina Catanduanes version, Choreographing Identity and the Politics of Dance in Insular Bicol. So, let me explain the title a little bit. So, this is a study that focuses on the Pantomina Dancing Catanduanes version, because there are many versions, and I'm talking here about politics of dance in Insular Bicol. Insular Bicol being Catanduanes. Of course, Masbate is also another island, Bicol Island. Pero ang inaano ko rito, ang binibigyan ko dito ng emphasis, talking about Insular Bicol, is that Bicol is basically insular and peninsular. Mainland Bicol and Insular Bicol. Mamaya-maya makikita natin yung significance ng differentiation na to. Okay, now naniniwala ako na it's important, no, to make clear your assumptions about the research that you do. Kasi yung iba, no, some people would say that when they do research, no, even in ethnography, they go to the field, they start the investigation with zero thing in their minds. Like people, they will just like to make the reality speak to them. Pero sa akin, I do not exactly work that way. I would always try to make clear yung mga assumptions ko bago ako mag-umpisa ng research. Meron ng assumptions. It's important to be clear about it. Because para sa akin, yun yung starting point, yun yung jump off point in doing the investigation. Para itong parang hunch na ito. Kung anong meron na dadatnan ko. Or kung anong, ito na yung basic kong framework. No? Sometimes, ito yung framework. Pinatawag natin theoretical or conceptual framework. Na pinanggagalingan ng gagawin mong research. Parang tipong, you do not start a research with zero thing in your mind. Meron ka lang kahit pa paano pinag-uumpisahang pananaw. At ito yun. my assumption is that Pantomina Catanduanes version is not something that has been lying around since time immemorial. Sabihin, Pantomina Catanduanes version is not an objective reality out there that is just waiting for people to notice. But my assumption is that it was actually actively constituted or constructed, sometimes you use the word constructed, by stakeholders for a purpose. Okay? So in short, itong Catanduanes version, in many ways, is an invention. It's a construction or a creation, if you will. And they had been actively constituted by stakeholders for a purpose. Meron silang agenda. And it involved a dynamic process of power play. Hindi ito simpleng proseso ng construction, but involved some power playing by stakeholders. And another thing, itong proseso ng pagbuo ng Catanduanes version ng Pantomina had been shaped by historical factors. Naglaro yung history, no? So, hindi ito basta namuo, kundi namuo ito along a historical evolution, if you will. Okay, so yung assumption basically ay theoretical aspect ito. So, ang mga issue ng teorya na na-touch ko dito, politics of identity, ang usaping identity ay isang political na usapin. Pag sinasabi ko kung political, hindi naman ibig sabihin yung politician o yung gobyerno, although siyempre kasali sila doon. Pag sinabi ko kung political, ang ibig kong sabihin, may kinalaman dito yung paggamit ng power in decision making. No? Decision making, things have to be decided, like coming up with a Catanduanes version of Pantomina. Things have to be decided, and when they decide, may dynamics, okay? Who gets to decide, so on. And then another thing na isang issue din ito ngayon sa anthropology, yung tradition ay invento. So invention of tradition. This is a contradiction in words, in terms, because tradition is supposed to be something stable, pero inimbento pala. Tradition supposedly comes from way back into the past, pero ito naman pala ay may pinanggalingan, inimbento somewhere in time. So yan po yung mga issue, theoretical issue na na-touch ko dito sa ethnography ito. Ano ba yung objectives ko sa paggawa nito? Dalawa. Una, I wanted to establish the historical trajectory of the Pantomina dance as it is implicated as a marker of national, regional, and sub-regional identities. So merong history, yung pagbubuo ng Pantomina dance on many levels, no? Ito ay na-implicate, okay, sa national na usapin, sa regional and sub-regional identities. Pangalawa, more specifically, to describe the dynamics of interaction between parties involved in the various moments of construction, inscription, interpretation, and presentation of the Pantomina Catanduanes version. So may dynamics ng interaction ng mga stakeholders dun sa pagbubuo ng Pantomina Catanduanes version. So yun po yung dalawang objectives na gustong makamtan itong aking ginawang case study. Itong ginawa kong ethnography at home. Now, methodology, siyempre, participant observation, interview of key informants, and ito po, ito yung sinasabi ko, I made a lot use of personal knowledge and experience. I drew a lot from insights from my experience in the past about Pantomina. Kasi po, bata pa ako, palagi ko napapanood yung Pantomina, sinasayaw ng mga matatanda in different occasions. And then later on, when I was in college, I became a member of the Hablon-Dawani theater group in the Catanduanes State Colleges before. And I was a dancer. And one of the dances na pinag-aralan namin, yung Pantomina. And another thing, I made a lot use of documents, documentary sources, no? Books, souvenir programs na pinoproduce during fiestas ng probinsya at ng Catanduanes Festival and so on. So ito yung sinasabi ko na multi-method, no? Ang ethnography, you are at liberty to make use of any source that you think would be useful. So yan po ang pinagdaanan kong anong tawag dito, investigation. Okay. Now, let me now go to the salient findings. Hindi ko na po i-elaborate masyado yung mga findings in details, no? Kasi nabasa naman natin yata. So, dito na lang po ako sa mga salient na findings. Now, along the way, as I discussed this, bibigyan ko ng konting mga dagdag na detalye. Okay, one. While Catanduanes folk had been dancing and singing the Pantomina since time immemorial. By the way, siguro nabasa nyo, pag sinabing Pantomina, dalawang bagay. It's not only the dancing, it's actually the singing. Because Pantomina is also the song. Okay? So, Catanduanes folk, no, had been dancing and singing the Pantomina since time immemorial in various occasions. It's really a cultural practice that is very, very much embedded into the life of the people, of the ordinary folk. Kasal, papantomina yan. Kapag mayroong fiesta, papantomina. So, you see this dance everywhere. Hindi lamang during programs ng Filipino Week, kundi talagang people know it. People know the Pantomina, the music, and the song by heart kasi very intimate sa buhay nila. Now, so that's it. They had been practicing the Pantomina. But, you know, the standardization of the Catanduanes version of the dance had been brought about by two important historical moments. Okay? So it came to happen that the dance had started and the music, no? The dance and the music started to be standardized into a Catanduanes version. And may mga historical moments na nagdala nito. At ang mga historical moments na to ay parehong tungkol sa assertion of identity. Okay? Una, Philippine nationhood. Ang tinutukoy ko po ditong Philippine nationhood, yung nangyari nung panahon na ng mga Amerikano na kung saan yung Philippine Commission noon nagpadala sa Amerika ng delegation, okay, para to lobby with the American government na pakawalan ng Pilipinas, gawin ng malayang bansa. Parang ganon. Ito yung tinutukoy ko po, no? Yung nung panahon na yon. Yung tinatawag na peacetime noon. So, nabasa niyo naman siguro doon sa aking presentation na yung Philippine nationhood, hindi lamang political, ang kasabay nito to convince the Americans na na politically pakawala na tayo, they had to demonstrate that we are worthy of independence. So how did they demonstrate that we are worthy of independence? Maraming anyo. Isa na dyan, yung tipong ang Pilipinas ay may sariling kultura. National culture. We are a nation. Ganyan. Kaya bigyan nyo na kami ng independence. Tingnan nyo, meron kaming culture na national culture. At ang isa sa pinakamahalagang aspeto nitong national culture na to ay yung dance. At hindi po malaking bagay ang ginawa ni Francisca Reyes Aquino, no, si Aling Kikay, national artist for dance, siya ang pinakauna yatang national artist for dance. Hindi po coincidence na yung trabaho niya to come up with national dances of the Philippines, to encode, no, or to decode these dances, document them, and then eventually writing a series of books on that. This was to demonstrate that the Philippines has a culture, a national culture, at ang isa sa mga ebidensya nito yung dance. Na sabi nila ay kapareho ng mga dances, folk dances sa buong mundo, no? Nasa parehong status or dignity. So yun, yan yung first historical moment. Kasi during that time, nung gumawa na si Mrs. Aquino ng libro, isa sa mga unang dances na naisama doon sa collection ay yung Pantomina. Except that, ang ginamit nilang version ay yung salbay. Now, another moment, historical moment, that has to do with independence or assertion of identity ay yung Catanduanes provincehood. Yung Catanduanes naging probinsya noong 1945. Hindi rin coincidence, no? It happened immediately after the war. So, pagkatapos ng gera, binigyan na tayo ng independence ng Amerika, binigay yung independence. Naging na tayong republic. Just a few, days or even weeks, in the same time, halos, yung Catanduanes nag-assert ng provincehood. Hey, we are a separate province, distinct from Albay, because Albay was our mother province. We were previously a part of Albay. So yung dalawang importanteng historical moments na yun ay naging malaking bahagi sa pag-develop ng Catanduanon version of the Pantomina. In both moments, dance, no, nabanggit ko na, had become a useful identity marker. So, nung naging independent na Catanduanes, maliban sa pagiging politically independent, siyempre, nagsumikap ang mga taga-Catanduanes na i-demonstrate ang kanilang pagiging worthy of being a distinct province. Isa na doon to demonstrate na mayroong Catanduanes culture na distinct. And one way to do this is to identify a Catanduanon version of the Pantomina dance. Of course, the Pantomina dance is the quintessential Bicol dance. Pero sabi namin, meron din kami. Meron kaming sariling version. Okay? Both doon sa singing, saka doon sa pagsayaw. Now, hindi naman kaagad-agad namuo ang Catanduanon version ng Pantomina. It developed through time. No? It was distilled through time. Unang-una, ang pinakauna dyan na measure, there was this group of musicians, ni-record nila yung Pantomina music ng Catanduanes. Nagkaroon sila ng recording for commercial distribution. So, ang naging epekto nito, lalong na-popularize yung music. At dahil may music na, madali na rin magsayaw sa iba't ibang venue. Kasi dati, para magkapag-Pantomina, mayroong kailangan makakanta, live, musician. But now, mayroong 45. Ang original nga nito, I'm still looking for a copy of that. Yung 38 RPM na plaka. Yan yung una, and then later on naging 45 RPM. So yun ang pinakauna. That was in 1953. Next, nag-umpisa lang mabuo yung standard choreography. Okay, hindi rin ito ganun kadali. Basta na lang siya namuo dahil there was this need, no, to dance the pantomina in formal functions. Okay. Halimbawa, during inauguration of newly elected officials, during the town fiesta, wherein the entire official dam of the town, nagsasayaw sila, no? Dati-rati, Rico Don de Honor ang ginagamit na sayaw, pero later on, ginawa ng pantomina. So yung ganong klase ng shift. At unti-unti, namuo itong standard choreography. Ang purpose ay i-showcase yung Catanduanes culture. Isa pang pagkakataon na ito ay nagawa ay halimbawa merong Bicol meet, kunyari, may Bicol meet. So yung mga taga-Catanduanes, pag merong cultural night during the Bicol sports meet, sinasayaw nilang Catanduanes pantomina. Parang this is now a way of projecting Catanduanes culture to the region. Okay, and finally, some teachers, okay, at the Catanduanes State Colleges, they codified the dance steps. Sinulat na, meron ng dance notation na ginawa. I think that was very important na standardized na ang choreography. At dahil eskwelahan ang naggawa nito, pinamulbon itong notation na to sa iba-ibang mga schools, tinuro sa mga PE classes ng elementary, high school, and so on, na-popularize ang Catanduanes version. Ang problema lang doon, okay, yung problema, yeah. Now, the process of standardization was prevailed upon by dominant socio-political stakeholders and arbiters of taste. Ang dami-dami pong version ng kanta ng pantomina all over the province. Kaso, along the way, namili na lang, meron na lang iisang version na naging popular. Kasi pinili na. At parang sinabi na ito ang standard. Alam niyo kung bakit ginawang standard yung kanta na ngayon? Kasi hindi masyado bastos. The pantomina singing, sexual tones. Ngayon, naghanap sila ng version na hindi masyado sexual kasi nga naman gagawing standard. Okay? Na magiging marker na ng Catanduanes identity. Baka naman sabihin, ay, ang babastos naman. Kaya namili sila. So, meron ng mga nag-decide, no? Ay, ito, hindi yan, ito. Ganon. So, may mga arbiters of taste, and these arbiters of taste and the stakeholders are the elite, socio-political elite of the province. And mainly, they were based in Virac, the capital town. So, mayroong finabor na version. At nasuppress yung ibang version. Yan ang naging problema ng standardization. Nasuppress yung improvisations na ginagawa ng mga dancers, ng mga singers. So, yun yung effect of standardization. Na-popularize ang pantomina through different performance venues in schools, in mass demonstrations, during fiestas. Tinanggal na doon sa traditional context of dancing. Ginawa ng festival. Ganyan. Ginawa ng palabas sa stage rather than sa isang actual na kasalan. So nailabas na siya doon sa kanyang original context of dancing. Okay, ang problema pa, na-suppress na yung improvisation and creativity ng mga tao. Okay, so yun po ang salient findings, no, ng una kong case in point na study tungkol sa pantomina. Okay, so let me go to the next. Okay, the second study is the Catanduanes making and seeing selves through the eye of the typhoon. Actually, let me make some confession here. I was really reluctant in submitting this for this seminar kasi yeah, it was published, okay, in the Aghamtao, but when I showed it to my friends and my colleagues and have them read it, aba, sabi nila, wow, ano to? Medyo difficult reading, sabi nila. Ganun ba? Ewan, I did this like in the late 1990s. So medyo matagal na. Sorry. Hindi 1990s. Siguro mga 2005, ganyan. Okay. Now, I think alam ko kung bakit medyo naging difficult reading. Kasi it is a material that should have been written in the thick manner of doing ethnography. It should have been done in a book length form. Mahaba dapat na paliwanag at mga presentation ng data. Kaso parang kinondense ko masyado sa isang into a few pages, kaya wow, kaya ganun siguro na naging resulta. Siguro mamaya-maya I think some of you will tell me na talagang some of you will confirm itong sinasabi ko na medyo difficult reading siya. But anyway, tinuloy ko pa rin kasi para sa akin isang magandang halimbawa ito ng doing ethnography at home, precisely because meron tong particular approach, yung tinatawag na auto-ethnography. Ibig sabihin, yung auto-ethnography, yung ethnographer ang parang pinaka-source, principal source lamang. Hindi na masyado nag-rely sa ibang mga sources. Parang tipong one is enough and that one is me. Parang ganyan. Bilang practitioner ng kulturang gusto kong i-describe at i-analyze. So, auto-ethnography. Some anthropologists would, frown upon this particular type of doing ethnography. Pero I tried it here. And happy naman ako dun sa result. And in fact, I am planning to come up with a book length form to give justice para sa akin dito sa material na to. Kasi medyo malawak. Okay, ito yung mga assumptions ko. Yung kanina, dun sa una, meron akong assumptions. Ito yung theoretical framework talaga that informs this investigation. May tatlo po. Una, ang sinasabi dito, one's sense of identity is intimately connected to one's sense of place. So yung identity at saka yung place ay konektado. Mahirap pag-usapan ng identity kung hindi natin titingnan yung lugar. Kasi yung identity tungkol sa tao, tungkol sa self, pero yung self, hindi siya mabubuo out of context. Ang pinaka-context niya, yung place, yung space na kung saan siya lumaki at umikot at namuhay. Or in another way of saying it, your self-concept is largely shaped by your experience of place. So geography, no? Geography. Basically, when we talk of place, we're talking of geography in all its aspects. So yun, yung connection na yun ang gusto kong explore dito. Pangalawa, yung identity at saka sense of place are socially and culturally constructed. Ito na naman po, siguro nakikita niyo, parang paborito ko yata itong notion of social construction. Now, kung tutuusin, place is something that is stable. Place is something that is given. No? Geography is something given. You don't have much control over geography. It's already there. You find it. Pero ang sinasabi ko dito, hindi po yung sense of place ay constructed. In a way, parang invention. Binuo mo na yan. Hinulma mo. Okay? Kamukha ng identity. Hinulma mo. Yung identity, madali nating sakyan na talagang hinuhulma mo yan. Pero yung sense of place, parang wow. Anyway, yun ang assumption ko dito. Yan ay parehong socially and culturally constructed. Now, another thing that I assume here is that both identity and sense of place are so constructed according, again, ito, no? Historical factors. Therefore, identity and sense of place can change through time. So, depende sa pinagdadaanan nitong historical factors. So, hindi po sila stable na mga reality, yung identity. Even Katandungan identity is not something stable and eternal. They are, you know, it changes. No? Pati yun nga, yung sense of place mo. Yung place mo, nandiyan na yan, yung bundok, nandiyan na yan. Pero yung sense of place, nagbabago. Depende sa how you deal with the bundok or with, you know, with the surroundings. Or how the surroundings impact into your life. Okay, yan po yung mga assumptions. Now, ano yung objective ko? Isa lang po. Ang bala ko talaga dito sa study na to, to explore the connection between identity and place through the Katandunganon experience. So ginamit ko yung Katandunganon experience bilang isang patutuo or case in point tungkol dun sa connection ng identity at sense of place. So Katandunganon identity as being shaped by Katandunganon geographic features, which to me is very specifically characterized by two things. Ang dalawang litaw or lutang na katangian ng Katandunganon geography, dalawang bagay, insularity, yung pagiging itong isla. At hindi lamang ito isla, basta isla, ito ay nakalagay sa isang lugar kung saan palagi itong nabubugbog ng bagyo. So, the very location of the island of Catanduanes is such that it receives a lot of typhoons, quite fresh from the factory of typhoons, Pacific Ocean. We are facing the Pacific Ocean directly, and during the months of September, October, November, up to December, hala, andyan na. No? Kami ang unang nahihit palagi ng bagyo habang ito'y nasa kasagsagan ng kalakasan niya. So we have experienced a good number of super typhoons. Of course, the most recent is Typhoon Rolly. So yung dalawang katangian na yun, yung pagiging isla at yung pagiging bagyuhin, yun ang para sa akin ay dalawang geographic features that shape the Katandunganon identity. So, so yan po, basically yung gusto kong i-explore, yung connection na yan dito sa aking ginawang study na to. Okay, now, methodology. Paano ko ba ito kinayod? Paano ko ito itinawid? Itong ethnography na to, ito yung aking mga method. Una, nabanggit ko na kanina, auto-ethnography or doing ethnography at home where the principal informant is one's own self. Ako mismo ang bida, ang pinaguhugutan ko ng data, yung sarili kong experience. Kaya kung siguro yung isang tao na wala pang masyadong experience, hindi pa pwede itong gawin. Although, siyempre debatable yan. Sino naman ang taong wala pang experience para paghugutan ng kanyang mga pananaw. Nung ginawa ko ito, I was already like 40 years old. So, marami-rami na akong bagyo at saka marami-rami na ang pagdaanan ko tungkol sa isang pagiging Catanduanon. So kaya marami na akong pinaghugutan. So I made use of my own experience. Okay? But experience, you get it from interactions, di ba? At very particularly, kumuha ako ng yung experience ko dito, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, interaction ko with 3 generations. Yung pakikitungo ko sa 3 henerasyon sa buhay ko. Una, my grandparents and parents together. Ito na yung generation before me. Okay? Of course, mahaba yan, pero bakit dalawa lang? Kasi ito yung dalawang generation na nakaugnay ko directly. No? Yung grandparents ko at saka yung parents. Pangalawa, yung sarili kong henerasyon. Pangatlo, yung mga generation after me. So yung interaction ko sa 3 ito yung pinaghugutan ko ng mga experience ko na ginamit ko dito sa study na to. Bakit 3 henerasyon? Kasi nga gusto kong makapture yung historical changes, no? in Catanduanon identity vis-a-vis geography or geographic features. Now, so the data consisted of reconstructions. So, nireconstruct ko yung mga experience ko. Pero along 3 dimensions. Una, views of insularity. Ano bang pananaw nitong 3 henerasyon na to tungkol sa pagiging isla, pagiging taga-isla? Pangalawa, orientation to typhoons. Paano ba sila nakikitungo sa bagyo? Sa dalawang paraan din, paano yung pag-predict? Kasi pag pinag-usapan ng bagyo, it's very important yung tungkol sa pag-predict ang pagdating nito. At saka kapag nandiyan na siya, kung paano nakikitungo ang mga tao sa mga bagyo. How do we deal with typhoons? Okay? When I talk to people na hindi taga Catanduanes, sabi ko, pag tinanong nila ako, ano yung mga taga Catanduanes? Ano ba sila? Oh my God, sabi ko, we are people who know how to deal with typhoons. In fact, we know typhoons better than human nature. Mga ganyang klase na pakulo or patutsada. Okay, yung pangatlo, yung sense of identity. So itong 3 to, tinignan ko dun sa 3 henerasyon. Meron akong matrix dito, parang ganito. On the left side, sources of data, the 3 generations. On the horizontal axis, yung data sets mainly composed of 2 clusters, sense of place and sense of identity. When I talk about sense of place, I'm talking about orientation to typhoons and view of insularity. So, yan po yung data sets, no, na dinather ko. Yung presentation ko dun sa ethnography, basically, a description of all of this. And yun na, tingin ko, hindi ko masyado, kinulang ako ng space in a few pages. Medyo malawak ito, mukhang hindi ko masyado na stress out doon sa, well, I tried my best. Ewan ko kung nasakyan nyo, hindi ko masyado na stress out doon sa aking presentation. I believe I need a book length, po yung aking matrix of data gathering. Okay, now, let me go to the salient findings. 1. Fundamentally, the Catanduanon sense of identity is hinged on 2 salient aspects of their sense of place, namely insularity and the recurring typhoons. So nabanggit ko na yan. Now, as such, the Catanduanons basically define themselves as resilient and hardy people. Makikita niyo ito sa mga mga souvenir program, no? describing what the Catanduanes are. Palaging itong dalawang to, resilient and hardy people. So, bakit? The insularity made them self-contained. Parang tipong meron kaming insular pride. Hey, we can take care of ourselves. Naka-isolate kami, nakamaroon kami. There's a big body of water surrounding us, separating us from the mainland. But we can still, take care of ourselves. Parang may ganung klaseng insular pride. Now, on the other hand, the frequent typhoons, parang ito yung tinatawag na crucible ng aming character. Ito yung nag-shape ng aming character. Dahil kami ay subok na subok sa kahirapan ng hamok sa bagyo, nakabuo ng character na resilient. Ganon. So, yan yung basic na pananaw ng mga taga-Catanduanes tungkol sa sarili nila. Merong isa pa dyan na dagdag, yung pagiging religious. Ako naman, ang tingin ko, yung pagiging religious na yan ay bunga din itong dalawang to. Bakit kami religious? Kasi palagi kaming humaharap sa mga pagsubok, sa mga risk, sa mga uncertainties. Kaya kami nagiging religious. At itong mga pagsubok, uncertainties na to, dala din naman ng mga bagyo at saka ng pagiging namin isla. So, ganyan-ganyan po ang itsura ng Catanduanon identity ngayon. Okay. Even so, such basic self-definition manifested variously. No? It looks like stable self-identity, but it has gone through changes, through time, brought about by changes in the sense of place itself of the generations. In the way they experienced insularity, there were changes in the way these generations experienced insularity and typhoons. Nagbago-bago din po. As for the generations before me, grandparents and parents, they relied more on traditional knowledge of typhoons, formed through very intimate familiarity with their environment. Nakaka-amaze yung parents ko, grandparents ko, they can predict more or less by smelling the air, by looking at, the heavens. They can predict, sasama ang panahon, ganyan-ganyan. So, intimate knowledge of the environment. Ganyan-ganyan ang source lalo na yung mga grandparents ko. Just to give you an example, this is the Catanduanon schemata of the winds. Yan yung mga namin, no? Yan yung mga traditional na mga term. Now, just one point I would like to call your attention. While we identify several habagats, habagat is not just one kind. Para sa amin, merong 1, 2, 3, 4 types of habagat. Yung ibang hangin, amihan, walang mga distinction. Bakit yung habagat may iba-iba? And if you go outside of Catanduanes, itong schemata na to, hindi na pwede. Kasi may reference doon sa geography ng Catanduanes, yung aming mga neighbor. Habagat sa Lagunoy, kasi galing sa Kamsur, Lagunoy. Berdaderong habagat, ito daw yung tunay na habagat. Igong habagat sa Mayong, galing naman ito sa bandang Albay. And of course, the last kind of habagat sa Bakong, Sorsogon. Bakit? Kasi, one, habagat is the strongest, no? The most destructive of all these monsoons. And during a typhoon, yung mga tao, they watch doon sa pagbago-bago ng direksyon. Kasi kapag nasa habagat sa Bakong, malapit na sa Salatan, and Salatan is the signal that the typhoon is already tapos. So parang this is a countdown to the end of the typhoon. Kaya lang itong countdown na to, the last 30 minutes or 1 hour of the typhoon, talagang malakas, very destructive. Kaya yung mga tao sinusundan, nasaan na? Lagunoy na. Ay, Verdadero na. Okay. Oh, my own, and then so on. And then, okay, salamat. Salatan na. So yan. Yung ganyang knowledge, kukunti na lang ang meron yan. Yung generation ko, meron pa kami, pero yung mga sumunod sa akin, hindi na nila alam yan. Okay. So subsequent generations, those after me, however, started to abandon traditional knowledge and skills and resorted more and more to scientific explanations and the use of more of modern media source of a source of information. Ito binigay ko ito dun sa ano no sa article, pinapakita dito yung iba't ibang generation ng kanilang source of information about typhoons. So nakikita natin diyan yung ano yung scientific knowledge nag-umpisa doon sa parents ko kasi nag-aaral sila. Okay? Yung mga libro nila on geography kalalaki, no? Ang hirap buhatin. So they were schooled, although they are familiar with the traditional, but they were schooled dun sa scientific method. Tapos yung later generation, ayan, gumagamit na ng TV, internet, and so on. Now, meron akong tawag, yung mga grandparents ko, ito yung mga sky watchers. They were searching the heavens for signs. Ito namang parents ko, tsaka my own generation, we were trained to read maps and plot the typhoons. But itong mga bagong generation monitor gazers. Yung monitor ng cellphone at saka ng TV, doon sila tumitingin kasi meron ng mga GPS, meron ng mga si Mang Tani, no? Meron ng very visual na na image. Hindi mo na kailangan i-plot ang coordinates tulad ng dati. So, yan. Okay. Now, another thing, the different generations involved also had varying sense of insularity depending upon their degree of interactions with outside world. Halimbawa, yung grandparents ko, they hardly had any clear knowledge of the outside world. Akala nila Manila is a legend. there were those in the generation of my grandparents na hindi sila makapaniwala na may Manila. Akala nila istorya lang. So, they had a very strong sense of self-containment. They have a very stable sense of insularity. Okay? But this would be eroded as Catanduanes started to have greater interaction with the world outside there. Halimbawa, members of the generation of my parents, when they went to high school, they have to go to Albay. Kasi walang high school sa Catanduanes nung araw. And then when they come home, they tell stories about, the ibong noon, people of Albay, and with a different, accent and so on. So, yun. Now, nag-intensify itong interaction na to, lalong-lalo na yung increasing globalization dahil sa technology ng communication at transport. Wow. Yung mga taga-isla, naging very familiar now with the world outside, and dati-rati merong animosity. No? I think you have read about it in my article. Dati may animosity ang taga-isla sa taga-mainland. No? We resent it. No? We suffer some discrimination when we go to mainland, to the mainland Bicol. No? May mga bansag sa amin. So, but ngayon nawawala yun. Nawawala na yun. Now, so the Catanduanes sense of identity is therefore something that changed through time according to how their sense of place has also evolved. So, the Catanduanes sense of identity is a work in progress. So yan po ang aking hanggang doon na lang po ang aking sharing. I think mas mahalaga yung kasi. Mahaba na ba? Mas mahalaga siguro yung interaction. Yung question and answer. Kasi doon naman tayo mas nag-enjoy talaga at mas natututo. So, Diyos mabalos sa inyong pagdangog sa inyong tiyaga. Ma'am Jo, okay na po ako.
Thank you,
I
Dr.
hope,
Ramon. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
sir. Thank you very much, sir. Ramon, Felipe, Sarmiento, on the
Salamat din
yes,
po.
on ethnography at home. We will now proceed with the second resource speaker. Let me now introduce our second resource speaker. Josefina Socorro Flores Tondo earned her bachelor's degree from the University of the Philippines, Manila, and Master of Science in Pastoral Sociology from the Asian Social Institute. She earned her Doctor of Philosophy and Anthropology degree at the University of Canterbury, where she was a recipient of the UC Doctoral Scholarship Award. Her doctoral thesis was presented to an international panel of anthropologists and passed accepted without revision. She was an academic and animation staff of the East Asian Pastoral Institute, Ateneo de Manila University, and a lecturer of the Institute of Information and Religious Studies, teaching sociology of change and sociology of religion for more than 10 years. She was a volunteer community organizer in Kenya and the Philippines, working with the farmers, slum dwellers, women, and youth. She was a research associate at the University of Santo Tomas Social Research Center, now called UST Research Cluster, for culture, education, and social issues, and a consultant for community development projects for the poor of UST, SRC, and Zambales. She was the former Dean of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, former Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and a very brief stint as OIC President of the Camarines Norte State College, while holding the position as the Vice President for Research and Extension Services of the Camarines Norte State College, which she still currently holds. She's currently the CNSC focal person for gender and development and editor-in-chief of the Camarines Norte State College Research Journal. She is also a member of the board of the Anthropological Association of the Philippines. Tondo's research interests are diaspora, transnational internal migration, transnationalism, globalization, religion, ritual, performance, and symbols. She was a course co-convener, tutor, and guest lecturer at the University of Canterbury. Let us all welcome our Vice President for Research and Extension, Dr. Josefina Socorro F.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me, Ma'am Grace?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I will share my screen now. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mon. I'm very happy about what you have presented. As part of the Philippine Ethnography's module, let me now focus on the ethnographies of mobile transnational subjects. This is not to mean that people do not move at all and that only some people move. What I'm saying is that some people move farther than others. So just to have a gentle reminder to all participants, keep your devices muted at all times during this session kasi kumisan may manarinig na ingay. And then participants' comments may be posted in the chat box. Now, let me start by a quote from Steve Jobs. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. I would like to connect this to what Ellie suggested this morning. You need to love what you're doing. I do remember telling you during the orientation that I actually never felt I fitted in any discipline until I found anthropology. And I'm so glad I never gave up looking because in anthropology, I found my home. Now, this webinar workshop, we take a look at three processes of learning. You have the guided learning, which would be the modular sessions. You have the independent learning, wherein you do your readings and perhaps field work. And then applied learning, wherein you write your ethnography. Hopefully, we will end up in writing the ethnography. Right now, we are doing the guided learning and you are doing your readings. Hopefully, if IATF permits it, we will be allowed to do our field work. So, this is Module 2, Philippine Ethnography of Mobile and Transnational Subjects. Cultural anthropology is the study of various ways of being human or human cultures. This means that attention to human beings' diverse beliefs, practices, values, ideas, technologies, economies, and other domains of social and cognitive organization that are integral to their quotidian day-to-day life. That's according to Kotak. So when we talk about ethnography, this is about looking at culture. The intention of ethnography is to see activities as social actions embedded within a socially organized domain and accomplished in and through the day-to-day activities of participants. It is the ability of ethnography to understand a social setting as perceived by its participants that underpins its appeal. That's according to Randall and Rousfield in 2014. Now, what is the advantage of qualitative ethnographic fieldwork research? It enhances the quality of data. Kilala nyo ba yung nakatayo dyan na nakapula? Nakita nyo? Okay, that was me about 13 years ago in Kuala Lumpur, with the Filipinos at St. John Cathedral. So it enhances the quality of data. It distinguishes normative and real behavior, what people say they do, and what people actually do. So, what are the disadvantages? Lagi namang may disadvantage, no? Of course, there would be smaller population studied compared to surveys. Data would be hard to code or categorize. Difficult, if not possible, to record notes while attending a ceremony. Yun ang problema ko while I was recording the sinulog, the sinulog ritual of New Zealand, in Auckland, and the sinulog ritual in Christchurch, New Zealand. So if you're participating in ritual, it's a bit difficult, awkward to be taking notes. If you're participating in a feast, sino ba yung gustong magsulat ng field notes kung gusto mong lang kumain? No? Feast yan, no? Or chasing through a forest for a wild pig hunting event. Kung kasama ka dun sa tribo na nag-hunt, mahirap mag-field notes kasi nahabol ninyo yung wild pig o yung baboy damo. So, on this right, I put in some funny cartoons. So how would you describe your style? Sabi nung anthropologist, I purposely don't have one. Okay, I'll just write generic, unremarkable. Ito yung nag-i-interview. Si anthropologist nag-i-interview. How do you code, what people tell you? Kung minsan, sa sobrang pagod natin, maglalagay na lang tayo ng mga generic comments. And that is actually some of the things that people mistakenly do while they're doing fieldwork. Ethnography seeks to present a portrait of life as seen and understood by those who live and work within the domain concerned, what it terms an appreciative stance through the direct involvement of the researcher in the setting under investigation. Ito yung paulit-ulit na sinabi ni Ellie, ni Suyen, sa ni Dr. Mon, participant observation. So, foundational question. Is culture observable? Fieldwork tayo, pumupunta tayo doon para makita yung kultura. Is culture observable? Can we see culture? So I cite here what Cariter cited from Evans Pritchard's Newer Religion. According to the quote, I was present when a newer was defending himself against silent disapproval on the part of his family and kinsmen of his frequent sacrifices. Question: is silent disapproval an observable behavior? Or is it an anthropological ethnographic interpretation? any one of you who has experienced growing up in a family, of course, we all grew up in a family, but have you ever caught the signals that your father or your mother gives you in terms of approval and disapproval? And can we say that we can actually observe disapproval? So this is a critique, again, cited by Carithers. This is about as raw a factual account as you will ever find in most ethnographic works. Yet not a single statement in it expresses a plain observation. Silent disapproval cannot be observed, but only surmise. So, can we observe silent disapproval? Again, Carithers continues to muse. How can knowledge, which we represent to ourselves as being impersonal and objective, be found on matters so subjective and mutable as interpersonal relations? Can we consider the things we gather from interpersonal relations an objective reality or an objective fact or a scientific result of a study? Understanding of scientific knowledge comprises three elements. One would be a community of knowers, or what we call the ethno that we are studying. That's why it's ethnography. No? That which is perceptually consensible to them, meaning to say that it is common knowledge to them. And C, that on which they reach consensus. Oh, they agree. Oh, yeah, totoo yan. We actually agree that this is correct. Okay. And three, to the scientific observers is in principle universal. And even though in practice access is limited by many contingencies in this principle, universality guides the self-understanding and routine procedures of science. In that sense, the whole edifice of science rests upon perceptual consensibility, the ability of people to perceive things in common and to agree upon to share perceptions. Meaning to say, if we agree that this is so, then this is true. If culture is observable, then it must be visible, correct? Or is it visible? Are all cultural facets visible, or are they surmised by consensibility? Let me go back to that. So if you take a look at this woman praying, can I make a consensible proposal to the people observing her that she is a person of faith? Am I observing faith? Or am I just observing a person standing in front of a prayer statue? These are good questions for ethnographers. We know what it means when one person sits in an elevated position, when everyone around them stands, when one person stands and everyone else sits, when everyone in a room gets up as someone comes in, when someone bows or curtsies, or in extreme circumstances falls to their knees before another who remains standing. So we know there's an important person when people stand up. We know when the person is a colleague when we remain sitting down. And we know there's royalty when we kneel. Or perhaps in church settings, we know that there's someone holy when people go down on their knees to worship. Consensibility means to share or have commonly accepted meanings attributed to symbols, signs, actions, and behavior. Growing up with my siblings, we learn to interpret our mother's facial expression when there are other people around. There is that look in her face, in her eyes, that tells us we have crossed a line that we should not cross at all. In this sense, for me and my siblings, disapproval is observable. Naglalaro-laro kami. Habang naglalaro kami na may mga bisita ang nanay at tatay, hihilingon mo sila lauguninda. Pag nahiling mi na may ibang ekspresyon ang matakan sa kuyang nanay, aram ko na Josefina, may ginawa ka na naman na mali. And that your mother disapproves of what you have done. Ethnography then is grounded on the assumption that culture is observable and that people's actions, which while open to interpretations, may have common shared meanings that could be explained to wider audience of culture observers, such as anthropologists, social scientists, linguistic scholars, educators, etc. The ethnographic research process is thus a collaboration between those who are living and working in the domain and the ethnographer doing the investigation of such a domain. Take a look at the right picture. You see the people doing their visitation, home visitations, and interviews. So, if we are dependent so much on the authors of culture, I do agree with Geertz. I did not put the quote here, but culture is like something that an anthropologist peek into the shoulder of the ones writing it. Culture is a text that we read from the shoulders of the authors. So in that sense, if they are the authors, then we approach these people who are the authors with much respect. And I find the classical, quote from James Spradley about this very, very worthwhile for us to reflect upon as ethnographers. James Spradley writes, "I want to understand the world from your point of view. I want to know what you know in the way that you know it. I want to understand the meaning of your experience, to walk in your shoes, to feel things as you feel them, to explain things as you explain them. Will you become my teacher and help me understand?" This is what I was talking about when I commented after the input of Suyen and Ellie, that anthropologists are always learning. We do not claim expertise at all about the culture of peoples. We recognize that different peoples are the authors of their cultures. And therefore, anthropologists are perpetual learners. We continue learning the whole time we are on the field. And we continue learning while we are writing our ethnographies. The ethnographer field worker then must communicate to the local people or subject of study as a student wanting to learn about a subject on which they are the experts. Very, very important also not to assume that the person in front of you knows less than you. There are some, I have heard this, at CNSC, literacy program for the indigenous people. Okay, we need to be very careful about that, because are we assuming that the indigenous peoples are not literate? Are we talking about literacy in terms of formal literacy, as in going to school? Or are we talking about literacy of the indigenous peoples in terms of dealing with their context and their environment? If I even jokingly told one faculty member, if I left you in the forest with a native indigenous person, who do you think will survive better? Because the forest is something that they know, and therefore they are literate in that sense. Ethnographers need to be good, alert participant observers, like observing behavior, quotidian, seasonal behaviors, spotting, identifying common threads, like, for example, repeated words or trending conversations. common artifacts, material objects, and symbols that you find. Itong trending, when I was listening to migrant workers talking among themselves, especially the domestic workers of Malaysia and Singapore, the common trend or conversation would be, especially for those who have experienced negative things about their employers, would be tao, how they are being treated as non-tao or as if they are not human. Okay, so this is repeated among the experiences of domestic workers. In terms of cultural artifacts, when I was visiting homes of Filipinos in New Zealand, I found the Santo Niño image in almost every home of Filipino residents. And for people who did not have, their own residences yet, because they just came, they carry the small items of the Santo Niño and some novena prayers of the Santo Niño. So very, very important for us to be aware that people carry in their bodies some expressions of identity and some things that they consider important. Actions, what rituals do they attend, and what happens, what will be their roles in the rituals, the flows and the orders of some things they do in their actions. We already know this. It's been repeated by Suyen and Ellie and Doc Mon. Ethnography is ethnographer-centered, mediated by the ethnographer's native culture, interpretive abilities, social relationships in the field. In the writing of the ethnography, the ethnographer self-acknowledges a quite different alternative to present his judgments about one group in a manner which will be persuasive to another group. So you have one group here that you've been observing, you've been interacting, you're doing research, and then you write about it, in your ethnography, because you want to present this group to a wider set of audience who would want perhaps or be interested to know them better. Of all the disciplines deployed in studying globalization, I now shift, this thing, like when we talk about ethnography, how is it applied in other ways aside from ethnography at home? So according to Hage, of all the disciplines, Hage, by the way, is based in Australia. Okay, of all the disciplines deployed in studying globalization, migration, and mobility, none are better equipped to capture the complexities of such social realities than an ethnographic analysis. Will this be true? Let me continue my discussion. So, according to Rosaldo, and this is part of the readings I gave to the people who are enrolled in this module, okay? Culture is defined by difference. Difference both makes culture visible to observers and makes it relatively easy to separate nature from nurture. It is easy to spot. Ellie, Doc Mon alluded to this, no? Pag naiiba, madali mong makita. Tingnan mo yung costume nitong tao dito sa picture, no? She's so colorful, and therefore, you know immediately that she is coming from a different culture because she is different. To continue from Rosaldo, cultural similarities could be biologically based, but differences require cultural explanation. To pursue a culture is to seek out its differences and then to show how it makes sense, as they say, in its own terms. In fact, Rosaldo is one of those Western anthropologists who came to the Philippines to do ethnography in the Cordillera Mountains, specifically the Ilongots. And his wife, Michelle, tragically died during their fieldwork. Since cultural practices can be seen and thus observable, thus all cultures are deemed visible for observation, right? Or not? When we are looking at the world, we are most of the time not conscious of ourselves. we are invisible to ourselves. We are more aware of the other who is distinct, apart, or different from us. And that's why very few people observe themselves or even try to understand their own cultural context. The more we are similar, familiar with one another, the more we cannot see them as the other. When we cannot see them, and I would repeat this very carefully, cautiously even, when we cannot see them, according to Rosaldo, they become people without a culture. In our eyes, according to Rosaldo, we appear to be people without culture. By courtesy, we extend this to post-cultural status to people who resemble us. What are the consequences of making our cultural selves invisible? What cultural politics erase the self only to highlight the other? What is the ideological fallout from display of cultural visibility and invisibility? Again, this has been repeated by the previous speakers. There's something political in terms of viewing cultures. Who views it? Who actually writes about it? Who tries to explain it to others? And then this is the most precautionary or cautionary thing that he would say, in his article. In the Philippine case, the people without culture occupy both ends of the social hierarchy. Roughly speaking, Negrito hunter-gatherers are on the bottom and lowlanders are on top. The difference is between the two ends of the spectrum is that the Negritos are pre-cultural and the lowlanders are post-cultural. I put it in a little bit of, framework here. The hierarchy of cultural visibility and invisibility or transparency. So pre-cultural, the nomadic tribes, why are they considered pre-cultural? Because they have less rituals. They are not stable. They don't stay in one place. They move from place to place, and therefore they don't have some accounts, at least by ethnographers, about their own, for example, architecture or agricultural practices. Now we go into the post-cultural creolized lowlanders or migrants now. So these are the people who have been trained by the Western world, who have assumed westernized cultural practices. Okay. Now, this at the center is the group that Rosaldo talks about, which is the best target of Western anthropologies. They can study the stable agricultural societies. They have harvest rituals. They have wedding rituals. Everything, is worthy of examining and documenting. There's just one problem. Are we going to agree with him as Filipinos? Do we take this Western model of cultural visibility and invisibility and just accept it without questioning it? And that is the main point of ethnography. We need to be able to question. He explains, evidently lowlanders are transparent to us because of their colonial heritage. First, they were evangelized under the Spaniards, then they were educated under the Americans. Like us, they have undergone an educational process that has disciplined them and made them fit to live in a city, work in a factory, serve in a penitentiary, or undergo confinement in an asylum. He's trying to be funny here. He actually is a humorous writer, and I do agree that he's a good writer. But I don't agree with his point of view. The model for cross-cultural understanding that produces immigration, so he moves, from that point of view to immigration, as a site of cultural stripping away is the academic version of the melting pot. Theories of acculturation and assimilation. In this view, immigrants are absorbed into the national culture. And then he was talking about how from Jose Rizal, when Filipinos go to the US, it becomes George Washington, as the national hero. And so I asked at the bottom, really? Really, 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 as Blackpink group would say in one of their songs. Take a look at the picture on the right. It looks like an ordinary sidewalk sale, and it could be anywhere. But that was happening in Kuala Lumpur. And the vendor is a Filipina domestic worker. So, Ronaldo's assumption is that immigration and residency in the US has culturally assimilated migrants, making them invisible or people without a culture. While there are signs of assimilation among migrant transnationals, I will not deny that, there are stronger signs and manifestations of migrant distinct cultural identity. And here I would give probably a very, very brief summary of the conference, of the ADMO presentation I gave way back in 2013, I think, in Ateneo. And the folklore, ritual, and power presentation I did with UGAT, I think in Davao City, if I remember right. So let me just go to this link. Okay, cannot open now. Sorry, people. So I'll just go. So let me just say that I did some research on migrant activities, and I presented them both in Ateneo. In UST, I also did some public presentation in UST about the migrant diaspora in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. And I also did a presentation of folklore, ritual, and power presentation in one UGAT conference. Now, this is me while doing my field work in Kuala Lumpur. Probably within the question and answer, I can show you the presentations I did, so that you can see the actual field notes of the conversations I had with migrants, because I presented it there complete in script. So this would be the migrants selling things in the sidewalks of St. John Cathedral in Kuala Lumpur. So this would be my Malaysia field notes, okay? Take note that while I do not say I, it is clear that I was in the room, okay? A priest entered the room as the group was preparing to start prayers and began to command them to leave, accompanied by shooing motions of his hands. This gesture, which in Filipino culture is never used on people, left most of the members of the group, I was talking about the Legion of Mary, on the right you could see them praying. I've been following them for about 5 months at that point. I only went there for the last time before I went back to New Zealand. And just to say goodbye and tell them that I will be coming back by December of that same year. So they were so stunned by the attitude of the priest. As they gathered Mary's icon and their belongings, take note, makikita ninyo sa picture, Mary's icon is there. There's a white, tablecloth wherein Mary's icon is placed. So they gathered that, as they gathered Mary's icon and their belongings, which consisted mostly of packed lunches, the priest momentarily left the room. One of them, Jasmine, which is not her real name, turned to me and said, "That is how he is. That's how rude he is to us. That's how he rudely treats us here. as if we are not human beings. That's how difficult our life is here. And if I remember the Filipino script, ganyan. Ganyan talaga siya. Ganyan siya kabasto sa amin. Ganyan niya kami tratuhin dito. Parang hindi kami mga tao. Ganyan kahirap ang buhay namin dito. Now, when we take a look at that, the ethnographer and the ethno he or she is studying, and somebody turns to you and says that, then we need to be able to figure out what that means. Okay? So, I went through a process of finding common meaning. So the Filipino notion of mutual human respect demands that acceptance and respect be given even to those of unequal social role, status, or income. Although this view is seemingly essentialist, it must be noted that kapwa-tao, like identity, is fluid. Its interpretation is always contextual. In this instance, the cleric's behavior can be seen in terms of existing power differentials and dualisms in the church, such as the polarities between clergy and lay, male and female. Now you see here the inference being drawn by the ethnographer. I am looking at the power differentials between the clergy and the lay in the Catholic Church, as well as the male and female in general in human societies. Why? Because the priest happens to be male and women are not ordained ministers in the Catholic Church. And therefore, the priest holds a superior position over the ordinary lay and especially women. Demonstrated through words and gesture, this rude behavior is perceived by Filipino domestic workers as a failure to recognize and respect them as fellow human beings. Parang hindi kami tao kung tratuhin. While priests are tasked to keep order in the sanctuary, they are also expected to be, first and foremost, shepherds and pastors who minister to their flock in compassion. So mataas ang expectation. You know, the domestic workers had a very high expectation of priests because after all, they know that they are poor in a foreign country and therefore they view the church as their shelter and perhaps even protector. Now, let's go to my New Zealand field notes. The story of Santo Niño Sinulog Fiesta in Christchurch is intertwined with a novena petition and a bride's migration story. Magda, not her real name, had various pen pals, but a prospective New Zealand suitor exhibited considerable persistence. He made frequent phone calls and eventually expressed marital intentions. Magda, however, I now shift from that, you have a very long interview and you summarize it as an introduction into the background of Magda. And then you write down the background of Magda. And then I shift now to what happened in the interview. Okay? And I write this in the ethnography. Magda, however, could not make up her mind. So she sought divine guidance and asked for a sign.
to the participants. We have experienced power interruption in the main campus, but the electricity has now been restored. Please kindly wait for the facilitators to reconnect on this activity. Thank you.
So we're back. We have a power interruption. We're trying to connect again. So please stand by for a while po. Waiting for Ma'am Jo. Hello po, Sir Mon, we just would like to inform you that we had a power service interruption here in the main campus. So we're trying to get back po. So I would like to let's have at least 15-minute water break habang bumabalik po yung ating mga kasamahan sa Office of the Vice President for Research and Extension. Thank you. So, Ma'am Jo, nakamute ka, Ma'am Jo. Nakamute ka po, Ma'am Jo.
Nagpunta
Okay.
siya. Ha?
Nagkaroon blackout dito sa diet.
Dito na kaya ano ka dyan?
Ah,
Mas marisip. At hindi ka man nag-time ng di nag-abuta. Ano ka man kan pagkaya ito yung istayong ayag.
Dr. Mon, you can be heard.
Di ba? Yan ka. Gasum ako. Yan po na baga. Dapat kasubago pa. Nag-inform ka naman.
Dr. Mon, please mute your mic. Okay, let me go back to screen sharing. Okay, let me continue with the interview portion of the ethnography. So, this Magda, the New Zealand bride, could not make up her mind. So she sought divine guidance according to her. Humingi ako ng gabay sa Panginoon. She says, I prayed I have to settle down. Now, I don't know which one. Marami siyang manliligaw. But if I go to this person, I think this is all right. Just give me a sign. The sign would be if I'm given a visa, because at that time it was very strict. It's not very easy to come. So you need prayers as well. Actually, I said to the Santo Niño, if I get married to this man and given a visa, when we celebrate 5 years, I will do it in January as a Thanksgiving for the Santo Niño, for giving me Bruce, not his real name, in my life. And I'll introduce the Sinulog in my new home. And since she was granted a visa, not only that, but she was able to find a job, then she began the tradition. She introduced the Sinulog in Christchurch. So it's very, very interesting that, you know, coming from your observation into your field notes, into the actual ethnography. The context of migrant strangerhood and marginality within the host culture makes the church a symbolic representation of home, as well as a refuge. And as the home of sacred icons of devotions and remembered home-led traditional rituals, the church mediates the migrant's home memory of the past and the home longed for in the future, even as his or her actual home had been reconfigured by migration. And what do I mean by this now? Whenever people leave, like for example, you have a family, you leave your family, you migrate, and in your mind that is fixated. You have the memory of that family at the time you left. But try to take note, this is coming from Dr. Mon and Ellie. Life goes on. The home in your absence is being reconfigured. And you, as you go through your migration process and you settle down in a new area, you try to adapt to your new environment and find what we call substitute or surrogate family. And in this sense, you know, when we talk about the migrant peoples in New Zealand, it becomes the church. Now, the funny part was that when I started my fieldwork and even when I was doing my research proposal, I actually never intended to look at religion. I was looking more at the push and pull of migration. What drives people off from their home origin countries? What attracts them to certain countries? What would be the pull of certain countries to Filipino migrants? Then I started my initial fieldwork and I started looking around, looking for Filipinos in New Zealand at first, because I was doing my proposal at the University of Canterbury. I realized that the easiest way to find them is to go to the church. And I was thinking, why is it that it's easier to find them in the church? What makes the church so attractive? Then I started digging. Oh, they have big gatherings. They have Santa Cruzan, they have Simbang Gabi, and they have the Sinulog. So in that sense, why, you know, like there would be a lot of secular things as well. You know, they would have sports festivals. But this sports festival would always have a mass. Merong misa, merong pare lagi na nandun. So I was looking at the connection between the secular and the religious. And then I started asking around, especially when they feel pressured about sending money to their families back home. Bakit kailangan mong magpadala? Kasi pamilya ko sila eh. Okay, so pamilya mo sila, pero hindi mo ba pwedeng ipaliwanag sa kanila na mahirap magpadala? And then there goes the dilemma. Because they feel it is their moral responsibility that supporting the family is what the good Lord wants them to do. May mga religious underpinnings. Parang ang feeling nila, nagkakasala sila pag hindi sila nagpapadala sa kanilang mga pamilya. And so when I looked around at all the Filipinos in New Zealand, most of them are sending their pamangkins, their brothers and their sisters, and all the poor relatives to school. Marami silang sinusuportahan. And this, you know, the very act of supporting their family is already reconfiguring the family. Most of the time, it creates actually dependency. Kaya nga, naririnig ko rin yung mga reklamo nila sa diaspora, yung diasporic circles. Akala nila tumatay tayo ng pera dito. Parang hindi nila maintindihan na mahirap din kumita dito sa New Zealand. Okay. So, in both cases, the home of their memory and the home they are creating in the diaspora are both being configured. Okay? One by their absence, the other by their presence. There are localizing efforts both by the transnational migrants and the locals taking divergent trajectories. One group performs homeland practices and the other preserves or protects local practices. An equal power typifies relations between migrants and locals in terms of opportunities and benefits. And this is true in every other country. While most of the Filipinos I interviewed in New Zealand are mostly residents, okay? They are resident migrants, and they are able to participate in the political processes of New Zealand because New Zealand is that generous. The migrants I met in Singapore and Malaysia would have some social disparities. The professionals are treated well by the Singapore government. but the domestic workers and the contractual workers and the laborers are not. And therefore, there are contestations within the diaspora. When I was in Singapore, one Filipina manager told me, ayokong pumunta sa Lucky Plaza kasi baka mapagkamalan akong domestic worker. Huwag kang pupunta dun kasi isipin nila domestic work, DW ka rin. Okay, that's what she told me. And I tried to keep a poker face as hopefully as best as I can. But I was actually amazed that among Filipinos, there is this disgust with their co-Filipinos in terms of occupation. In Christchurch, the situation is different. That most of the newcomers in Christchurch at the time, when I was at the University of Canterbury, were nurses and caregivers. So in order to understand them better, I saw an ad advertising for a caregiver position. So I was thinking, why don't I go through a process of application? Sige, apply din ako na maging caregiver. And I was thinking, siguro hindi naman ako papasa, ano bang alam ko sa caregiving, no? And so I went for this interview. I was amazed that after the interview, they told me that I can actually work as a caregiver. I will be given some training of sorts, but I will be like a casual, no? Yung parang pag merong regular employee na absent, ako yung ilalagay nila, parang substitute, no? Substitute na caregiver. So for about a year, no, I actually knew what Filipino caregivers go through. Ito yung sinasabi ni Ellie, ni Suyan, to walk in the shoes of the people you are researching on. Although, of course, I don't know the paths of other migrants in New Zealand. But I do know what happens and what the caregivers go through in order for them to be able to send some money to their families. And being a student, baka naman isipin nyo talagang nagtrabaho ng full-time caregiver si Tondo. Hindi po. We are only allowed to work about 20 hours a week. And some of the 20 hours I used for the university because I was also a tutor. So I would actually, just go for caregiving for about probably 16 hours or 8 hours a week. Locals enjoy the protection of nation-state regulations and policies and are supported structurally by established system support. It is the peripheral and disadvantaged position with a multicultural but unequal field that diaspora identity construction takes place. And it's very, very important. According to the Filipino brides who came, it was very lonely in New Zealand at the time when they started coming 1970s, 1980s. And so what they did was, when they see each other in church, they would schedule barbecues, no? Magsasama-sama sila, magsasalo-salo sila sa pagkain. And because they were discriminated upon, that the New Zealanders looked down on them as what they call mail order brides, okay? In quotation mark, mail order brides. They form a solidarity. It is actually in this common, experience of being discriminated upon that the diaspora in Christchurch and in some parts of New Zealand was born. They felt that they had some common things together as brides of New Zealanders. In Singapore and Malaysia, it is actually in the church wherein the domestic workers can find some rest. During their day offs, they don't have anywhere to go. So they would go to the church and see each other, eat some Filipino food, pray a little bit, but most of the time, spend the whole day socializing with each other. Scholarly discourses on Filipino transnational migration cannot simply be restricted to a purely economic perspective. That is part of my findings. Because migration for Filipinos is enmeshed with the sacred. In both New Zealand and Singapore, the interconnection between religion, migration, and diaspora has been repetitively demonstrated. The devotional ritual and prayers, asking the holy patrons for visa approval and good jobs, the ethical and moral responsibility of sending remittances to the family, attachment to sacred icons and symbols, church attendance, and ritual participation in the diaspora. These are all happening. You go into the car of one Filipino, you would see a rosary somewhere, within the car. I remember hitching a ride with a New Zealand bride with her husband, with her new husband. And the husband kept on complaining that, there is this Santo Niño in front of him while he's driving, looking at him, and that was really funny for me, because the foreigners just humor their brides, and he was saying it in a bit of fun, hindi naman niya pinagagalitan yung asawa niya, niloloko niya. Look at this, no? So one fellow is looking at me. Look at me. So, sige. And these Filipino brides are able to get, maneuver some points of affection from their new husbands because the new husbands actually tolerate their religiosity. So, in this sense, I'm saying that among Filipinos, migration is not just economic, it is also religious. Religion and the sacred economy provides an understanding of the Filipino migrants' exercise of agency, ethical and moral commitments to the family, risk-taking, resiliency, religiosity, attachment to sacred icons, church attendance, ritual participation, and community feasting. Why do I say it is a sacred economy? Case in point, the Santo Niño icon being used in the celebration of the Sinulog in New Zealand. It was ordered in the Philippines, ordered sa Pilipinas, dinala sa New Zealand. Pagdala sa New Zealand, hindi inilagay sa baggage compartment. The Santo Niño had a seat in the airplane. O diba? Economy yan. Diba? And of course, the donation came from very grateful migrants who were able to successfully get residency in New Zealand. Kaya marami silang nalikom na halaga para mabili yung sacred icons. And then, just that very personal, treatment of having an airplane seat for the icon tells you that it is not just religious. There's some economy going on in this transaction. Not only that, hindi nag-iisa yung Santo Niño. That's why I put all the Santo Niño. Actually, kaunti pa ito, Christchurch ito eh. Mas marami yung sa Auckland na nakita ko mga Santo Niño. Isang pagkahaba-habang table with all the Santo Niños. Where did they get it? Of course, they took it from home. And some enterprising Filipinos, business-minded Filipinos, also started selling Santo Niños. So, may economy, no? Nandun yung economy. Now, in terms of Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia, the Filipino food being sold outside St. John Cathedral illustrates that this is also a very, very economic activity. No? When they go and worship, there's an accompanying very, very alive economic activity. If you have read Lynch, when we talk about the fiesta, okay, the fiesta with the feria, no? The feria wherein all the things are being sold, may mga games, etc., etc. That is how St. John Cathedral is every Sunday, no? People go inside and worship, they come out and buy so many things outside available, and very, very, very important in the public space. Malaysia is while it's true that there's freedom of religion in Malaysia, it is basically a Muslim country. And pork is not allowed in public spaces unless you put a sign, hindi, this is non-halal, no? But there's a bit of tolerance, in terms of the Filipino migrants, because they're allowed to buy and sell, pork dishes in the sidewalks of St. John Cathedral. So there's some sort of accommodation in the host country in terms of the bawal. The approach to culture begins when the ordinary man and woman becomes the narrator. When it is he or she who defines the commonplace of discourse and the anonymous space of its development. That's coming from Desert 2. The Filipino diasporic place in Singapore continues to be narrated by the footsteps of the Filipino domestics, the common tao overseas, developed within the anonymous spaces of their resilience. In this sense, this is what I have always insisted. Ethnographers merely writes down the culture of the people they see. By the way, in the picture, you could see the Filipino chaplain of in Singapore. Undoubtedly, a shift towards mobility and deterritorialization has taken place in the last few decades, challenging anthropology to follow the trail of this movement. For some anthropologists, at least, following this, in quotation mark, once natives in the diasporas thousands of miles away from their homelands are as worthy of attention as the search for the natives, in quotation mark, in native lands. And that's my main argument here now. Like, why do we study people who are outside the country, the transnational migrants? Let me just emphasize that the basics of ethnography remain the same, regardless of the subjects and location. What distinguishes the ethnography of mobile subjects, such as the transnational migrants, would be their cultural identity performance across national borders, beyond the control of the nation of origin and the disciplinary mechanisms of destination, nations, and countries. The Philippines cannot control what migrants do. They cannot regulate that. And that's why when you observe them overseas, what they do voluntarily must mean something. It must be important. If they go to the church every Sunday to socialize with their friends, to pray, to eat Filipino food, then that must be significant because no one is ordering them to do so. No one. And therefore, it becomes even more meaningful. Dito lumalalim ang diskusyon ng ethnography. Bakit? Why is it that they have to go to church? Why is it that they have to pray? Why? 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 So, this is the end of my presentation. Probably we can answer some questions. I'm just sorry that the link to my two presentations did not open up. But if it comes out in the question and answer, perhaps I can answer it more. Probably I can try to show it because I put it in one folder. Now, let me just say this. The great aim of education is not knowledge, but action. I'm one of the activist anthropologists. If what I do does not make a difference, why should I do it? We do what we do to make people be aware of diversity, to make people be aware of differences, and to make sure that difference does not mean insecurity, does not mean that your life will be threatened. According to Ruth Benedict, the aim of anthropology is to make sure that the world is safe for differences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Josefina Socorro F. Tondo and Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento, our resource speakers for this afternoon on Philippine ethnographies and ethnography at home and ethnography of mobile transnational subjects. So I think our resource speakers are now ready to answer questions from our participants. I actually received actually it's a text message or a chat message from Dr. Delmajin Abad of the College of Education. The question po is for Dr. Ramon Felipe. It's about in doing ethnography at home, how can the researcher do away with potentials for bias? Sir Mon?
Ano po yun? Potentials for
bias.
Pakiulit yung question.
Yes po. In doing ethnography at home,
Potential ano po?
potentials for bias po. Bias.
Bias. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Ang aking sagot kaagad diyan, to be able to get rid of biases is to be aware of them. That's the first step. Mahirap tanggalin ng bias, lalo na dahil ito ay bahagi ng pagkatao mo. Na-pick up mo ang mga biases mo along the way habang ikaw ay nakikipamuhay sa paligid. Sabi sa phenomenology, hindi dapat katakutan ng bias. Ito ay huwag itago. Ilanta dito. Make it explicit. I think that's the first step. Ngayon, ang iba pang pwedeng gawin ay, yung i-admit mo and make it explicit. Tulad ng ginawa ko, sinabi ko kung ano mga assumptions ko. Hindi ko ito tinatago. At the very outset, inaano ko na. Ginagawa ko ng ini-state ko na kaagad. So isa yan. Yung anthropologist, habang siya ay nagkakaroon ng experience, nako-cultivate itong skill na to, yung pagpasok, to get out and in. Sabi nga ng iba, yung paa ng anthropologist, yung isa nasa loob, yung isa nasa labas. Kailangan parang labas-masok ka dun sa kultura. Papasok ka para dinig mo sila, makuha mo yung kanilang point of view, yung native na na pananaw, pero kailangan magdidistansya ka din. But then also tanggapin natin na never na maging tayong tulad ng natives. At saka yung ethnographer, hindi niya kailangang subukang magpaka-native or maging katulad nung native na pananaw o na ugali o na feelings. Siguro yung empathy, yun yung magkaroon ng empathy dun sa tao na gusto mong maintindihan. Kasi never naman na maging katulad ka talaga nila. I think you get to ewan ko kay Ma'am Jo, pero sa akin hindi madali na mawala ang biases. Pero habang ikaw ay patuloy na gumagawa ng ethnography, habang ikaw ay lumulubog sa field, na-cultivate ang skill na to ang isa pa diyan, lumalawak yung pananaw mo. Yung paglawak ng pananaw mo sa mga bagay-bagay I think nawawala na yung mga biases. Hindi naman nawawala, kundi na panghahawakan mo na. Ganun po. Ganun po yung aking pananaw.
Thank you, Doc Mon. Ma'am Joy, you have something to say po about the question?
There are pros and cons now. Like if you acknowledge that you're part of, that you share some common, features of the culture of the one you're observing, then that's a plus, no? Kasi naintindihan mo in depth, no? I learned this when I was in Singapore. I was following the Simbang Gabi, no? And so there was one point wherein, talagang grabe yung tao ng Simbang Gabi, no? The church was always full, if you are late, then you cannot even get inside the church. So there was one Simbang Gabi that my time was totally wasted because I was just there outside the church looking in kung paano ako makakapasok. So the next day, I decided I would go early. Okay. And I went in as soon as the church was open, and I was able to find a seat a little bit near the front, pero ang daming mga reserved seats. Okay. And then I realized kung naiintindihan ko yung point of view ng mga Pilipino. Nagagalit yung mga Singaporean ushers. And the Singaporean ushers were approaching the Filipinos who put their handbags, their umbrella, pati yata sapatos nilagay na para lang doon i-reserve doon sa mga kaibigan nila. Kaya while technically the church was still half empty, Filipino culture, in terms of Filipino culture, the church was full. Kasi andun yung mga reserve, may mga reserve markers, no? So, and then very funny because in one Simbang Gabi, the ambassador herself was late. And so her seat was given, including her husband, her seat was given to the people na malapit dun sa seat niya. Kasi nag-start na yung mass, wala pa. Sabi ng mga Singaporean ushers, if the persons that you are, if their served seats have no one sitting down by the start of the mass, it will be given to the people, no? So gano'n. Anyway, pinaupo ngayon yung mga tao na malapit. Biglang dumating ngayon si ambassador, nag-i-start na yung misa. So nagkagulo, pinapaalis ngayon ng mga ushers yung Pilipino. Ang daming reaction, no, from my seat. No, I was about five rows away from the contested seat of the ambassador. And sabi sa akin, sabi nung isang nakatayo, ba't kayo aalis? Wala naman siyang kausap, no? Wala siyang kausap. She was just saying, ba't kayo aalis? At pag tayo ang nasa embassy, pinapapila tayo. Pag late tayo, nagagalit sila. Yung mga ganong conversations no, going on. I forgot the exact words. But the point is, I understood. Why? Because this is what we call parinig. You are not talking to anybody. You are just expressing an opinion. It is not directed at anyone. And therefore, it is what we call safe. And it actually saves the face of people who will be embarrassed by what you are saying. Wala kang kausap eh. If I were a foreign anthropologist, hindi ko alam yun. Sasabihin ko, may nagsisiraan ng bait dito sa loob ng simbahan. Ba't siya nagsasalita nang wala siyang kausap? Okay, this would be the process of sharing the culture of the people you are observing. But at the same time, yun nga, yung bias, no? Because the Philippines is actually very, very hard to govern. We are a very, very fractious people, very regionalistic, ang dami-daming mga alliances, no? And since I am a Filipino anthropologist in Christchurch, there are also factions among the Filipinos in Christchurch. Pag nakita kang kausap nung isa, ayaw kang kakausapin nung kabila. So it took a lot of effort on my part to really nurture friendships. Maraming tatanong sa akin, ba't natagalan yung fieldwork mo dito sa Christchurch? Ay naku, sabi ko, malabang istorya at ang hirap pumasok sa mga alliances ng bawat grupo. Especially if they know that you are close to certain people at you are talking to certain people. Grabe yung dudahan, no? And may biro pa nga yung mga Filipino doon. When somebody loses an election in a Filipino organization, the Filipino will just leave the organization and start a new organization. That's how fractious we are in the diaspora. If you think na we have a common Filipino identity, forget about it. It's actually a very, very fractious identity. But, the funny part is that all these fractious groups come together for the sinulog. Kaya nga, na-attract yung attention ko ng sinulog. Ano ba yung nangyayari dyan sa sinulog yan? Sa kayong Santa Cruz na yan? At bakit yung magkakaaway, magkakasama? di ba? Yung mga ano. So it's actually a very, very good ano. So, bias, you cannot really eliminate it totally. You just need to, tama si Dr. Mon, you just need to be aware and still follow the rigors of the discipline in terms of honesty. Importante, and stick to the truth. Kung ano yung narinig mo, yun ang narinig mo, regardless kung sino yung nagsabi niya.
Thank you very much, ma'am. We have another question po, still from Dr. Dalmatine Abad of the College of Education. How important it is to have sensibilities to observation in ethnography. How important it is to have sensibilities to observation in ethnography.
Ay, sino po ang...
Is Dr. Yes po.
Ay, sige, and then, oo. Pag-observe, napakahalaga. Again, this is something that you cultivate, no? To be able to, to be able to see details that some other people will miss. Yung isang technique na ginagawa ko is you approach your subject for observation fresh as if it's your first time. So, pinapatry ko ito sa mga estudyante ko noon. Sa Lasal, they ride elevators going to classroom. So I tell them, come to the elevator as if it's your first time. And you're going to see things that you never saw before. Yung tipong mga bagay na taken for granted, nakikita na nila. Sabi nga kanina ni Ma'am Jo, look for the difference. I mean, anong meron dito? Anong kamangha-mangha? Anong kakaiba? I-suspend mo muna yung yung pananaw na alam mo na to. Mahirap din gawin yun kasi nga naman very familiar ka na, araw-araw ka nag-elevator, pero you try it and then you practice that kind of approach, no? Looking at things freshly as if it's your first time. Nade-develop yung observing faculties. Ang importante talaga mag-observe. The more details, ethnography, thick description, literally thick kasi ang dami mo dapat na makikita. And then you see things all at the same time, nakikinig ka rin. Yung 5 senses mo gumagana. Like when you go to Quiapo, Diyos ko, the 5 senses will be engaged. May amoy, may lapot yung hangin. May naririnig mo yung ibang klase ng and then you even taste the air of Quiapo. So ganun po. Again, practice will teach you along the way how to become more and more keen in observing. Importante po talaga yung observation. Pag hindi ka masipag dyan, forget about anthropology or ethnography. Ganun po.
Thank you, sir.
Ma'am.
Okay. I taught at the Institute of Formation and Religious Studies for about 10 years now. And I taught sociology of change. So as part of the course, I asked my students to observe the marginalized sectors of society. Now, one group, a very creative group, I suppose, and probably the bravest of the groups, composed of some sisters. My students were mostly novices and juniors. The juniors are being prepared for final profession. So anyway, after that, I got this report in class. This group chose the prostitutes to observe. Alam niyo ba kung gaano kahirap maghanap ng mga prostitute diyan sa Cubao, no? Napakahirap na gawin yan. And even me, as I just took my master's there. Wala pa akong anthropology degree at that time. Hindi pa ako pupunta sa UP Diliman. I was a young product of the Asian Social Institute. Young not in terms of age, but in terms of my engagement with the discipline of sociology. And I realized that my students are braver than me, no? So marami silang insights, no? And then one sister said it all in her narrative. Ito yung narrative niya, sabi niya, at least from what I remember, no? Sabi niya, I've always understood that prostitution is actually selling the body, no? The human body is being used, as a sex object. I've always understood that in my head, she said. But when I went to Cubao and I was there, observing the prostitutes, one man actually came to the bugaw. Alam niyo yung bugaw, di ba? Yung taga-benta ng mga girls, no? So the customers don't go directly to the girls. They actually go to the bugaw, no? To get, the girls they want or the woman they want. Okay. Anyway, this man went to the bugaw and indicated her, yung sister. Siya yung gusto ng lalaki. And she heard the conversation. Magkano siya? While the conversation was going on, the man was looking at her from head to foot. And this is what she said. Now I finally understood how to be in the shoes of somebody being bought. Alam ko na ang pakiramdam pag ibinebenta ka. And that really made a very, very strong impression on her. Okay. And for a while, as we reflected, I had to debrief them because, of course, that's a very traumatic experience. Can you imagine somebody who is training to be a sister being muntik na maibenta into prostitution until somebody intervened because they also had contacts. Kasi alam niyo naman, yung mga sisterhood, merong yung mga contacts yan sa exposures into the prostitution side. Okay. Don't think that sisters are very, very innocent po. Marami sa kanila, a lot of them have undergone exposure to the very, very laylayan of society, no? And that actually was the reason why I had that course requirement, no? To take a look, walk in the shoes of the people within the laylayan of society. So ito lang yung importante. Importante yung sensitivity for you to have that self-reflexive understanding of what the situation is. To know the meaning, no? What is the shared meaning? What is the shared meaning of prostitution there, no? What is the shared meaning of prostitution? I even heard it from my uncle. Na-shock talaga ako ng gusto kaya nga siguro grabe yung advocacy ko sa gender equality. Kasi from my uncle told me, ay mabuti na yung may mga prostitutes, mabuti na yung may mga bailarina, may mga puta kasi pag wala sila, paano yung mga bubuting babae? Baka ma-rape sila, etc., no? And that's actually a reasoning that I have heard even among some faculty members, no, of the institutions where I taught, and that it also includes, by the way, CNSC, no. So itong mga bagay, itong tawag natin, ang sinabi ko sa aking input is consensibility. What are our shared meanings? And if the shared meanings is really doing bad to certain sectors of society, then we should change these meanings. That's where anthropological activism comes in. Kaya nga, importante that the anthropologist does not just look at culture as something that is fixed, that culture can change for the better. It is evolving. Sure, we preserve what is good, but at the same time, we need to be able to convince people that perhaps some things are worth changing for the better of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Jo. So we have here a question in the chat box, although naka-direct message. So the question is coming from Dr. Jocelyn Trinidad, the research coordinator of the College of Arts and Sciences. The question is, how do we ensure generalizability of findings in autoethnography? what are the common sources of data that we present in the discussions? Sir.
Okay, so kasi ako nag-present ng ethnography. Yung issue ng generalizability, yun ba yung term?
Yes.
About findings, iba ang batayan, no? Kapag quantitative ang ginagamit mong method, generalizability can be obtained kapag sabi sa quantitative, kapag yung ano mo, yung anong tawag dito, yung sample mo has been drawn, no, scientifically, so that it's representative of the universe, of the universe population. Parang ano, statistical, no, ang batayan. Dito sa sa qualitative research in general and ethnography in particular, lalo na yung auto-ethnography, kasi halos isa ka na lang, na ikaw na lang, sarili mo pa yung anong tawag dito, source ng data. Parang hindi masyadong yung data mo, multi-source. Kaya talagang challenge, no, na ma-convince mo yung reader na meron tong applicability na mas malawak kaysa dun sa sayo, di ba? Yun ang ibig sabihin ng generalizability yata. Merong applicability sa mas malawak na scope kaysa yung sayo lang. Something na very personal sayo yan. Ang masasabi ko diyan, una, yung resonance, no? Kapag binasa na yan ng reader, papasok sa isip niya, oh my God, tama to. Kasi nakaka-connect siya. Sabi kanina ni Ma'am Jo, yung may similarity, meron kayong common ground na hit, merong string na common ground, merong sound, merong tono na nag-hit, at nakapag-identify ka. The more siguro na ito ay nagre-resonate sa mga readers o sa mga sa tawag dito, yung nagbabasa ng ethnography, the more, it becomes valid. It becomes valid in the sense, yung findings mo valid in the sense na hindi ito sobrang unique, hindi naman ito sobrang kakaiba. In fact, very personal. Ang maganda nga doon, hey, something very personal, pero meron siyang connection sa mas malawak. Kasi nga naman, I think yun yung anong tawag ko dito, yun yung pinanggalingan ng pananampalataya ng research. The assumption that somehow human experience is basically the same. We are beset with basically the same concerns. So yun, no? Although, kaya lang, ang sinasabi natin, importante sa qualitative research saka sa ethnography, na to take account of the difference, of the diversity, of the particularity. So hindi dapat nawawala yung particularity, kasi kapag nag-generalize tayo, usually din, no, kapag statistical, hanapin natin yung central tendency or yung simple statistics, yung norm. Nawawala na yung yung human face ng reality. Kaya I think doon sa punto na yon, na it's something very personal yet it's something universal, andun yung yung validity. It becomes valid, or kasi yun naman yung esensya ng pagiging generalizable ng data mo, ay valid siya. So the more na nakikita natin ang connection na to dun sa particular tsaka yung more universal, nakita natin ang connection na to, it lends more validity that, hey, what we're talking about here is something that's very human and very intimate at the same time sa tao. So hindi po statistical, no, ang pag-establish ng validity ng ng qualitative research, kundi ito pa yung kung saan ang mga tao ay nagkakaroon ng koneksyon, nakakakita ng koneksyon doon sa mga findings ng ethnography. I think yun yung appeal ng ethnography. It's able, or ng qualitative research, it's able to come up with a good balance between the details and the big picture. So, yun po yung aking take dyan. Ma'am.
Thank you, Sir Mon. Ma'am Joy, you have anything to say about it?
Very, very simple kasi kanina sa chat box nag-comment si Jessie yung triangulation. So it's okay. No, I have my own take in what is happening in a certain event, in a certain cultural aspect. But if you have seen, the methodology of Doc Sarmiento, he also triangulated it with his grandparents, his parents, and the generation after him. So ibig sabihin, his experience is checked with the experiences of others, which is quite important, especially when you're doing phenomenological, the phenomenological approach. No, yes, there's a certain sense of subjectivity, but we should also pay attention to intersubjectivity. Kaya nga doon pumapasok yung consensibility, no? Consensibility meaning to say that we share certain things that are common to all humanity perhaps, or all Catanduanes perhaps, or all Norteños perhaps. No? Like for example, in Norte, we all know that the fish come from Mercedes. Alam natin lahat yan, di ba? And we share that. Pag biglang may kinakain ka, saan ito? Tapos sabihin, galing sa Mercedes, okay, that's fine. Paracale is okay kasi alam natin na malapit din sa dagat yung Paracale. But mostly, we know that gold comes from Paracale, di ba? Ganun yung yung may common knowledge tayo. Kaya pag biglang may naghukay ng ginto sa daet, tataas yung kilay natin. Kaya maraming chismis tungkol dun sa hukay diyan sa simbahan. Hanggang ngayon, naririnig ko pa yung chismis na yan na meron daw nakuhang ginto kasi pinahukay daw ni dating Pangulo before, etc. sa nag-treasure hunt. Maraming mga ang tinatawag natin diyan mga urban tales. Urban tales come out mainly because there is a breach of consensibility. Yung biglang may nangyayaring hindi natin alam kung bakit. So there are the urban tale explains, explains kung bakit nangyari yung hindi dapat mangyari. And I think you will be hearing a lot from this from Daniel Yo, kasi he's an urban anthropologist, and he will be doing the visual anthropology, So ganito yung mga kasi by nature human beings are rational, okay? And when something is not rational, we try to find explanations. And either sa Pilipinas, either nagiging pamahiin yung urban tale, or yung sa Quiapo. Maraming tatanong, ba't daw sa Quiapo, napakaraming gustong magpakulam ng bawat ng kapwa, di ba? Di ba maraming tanong. And in one discussion in our class among the class of Dr. Michael Tan, we realized because the justice system in the Philippines is so slow. Pag inapi ka, pupunta ka sa husgado, gagastos ka ng napakalaki sa abogado, kumisan wala pang nangyayari. Pumunta ka sa Quiapo, bumili ka ng itim na kandila, itirik mo, isumpa mo yung kaaway mo. And then, hindi man nangyari. Nakalabas yung galit mo, di ba? And that's, I think, one of the best, Kaya nga, I love, part of the reason why I love the class discussions in my anthropology class sa UP Diliman, before I went to New Zealand. Mainly because we are able to figure out certain explanations kung mga bagay na ginagawa ng mga Pilipino na mahirap maintindihan. Di ba? Are you getting me? Ganon yung natin. So we go to pamahiin, yung mga paniniwala, urban tales, etc., mainly because this is actually a search for rationality to find an explanation for something that probably is inexplicable. Kapareho na lang yung grotto sa daet. Ba't biglang nagkaroon ng grotto dyan sa simbahan na dati naman may grotto yan sa tabi, biglang napunta dun sa isang corner ng simbahan. Kasi sabi ng iba, hinukay. O bakit naman hinukay? O, marami ng urban tales yan sa daet. Hanggang ngayon naririnig ko pa. Kasi may nakuha daw dyan na ginto. Totoo ba? Hindi ko alam. I actually have no idea. But that's what I hear from conversations.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have another question here po. Good afternoon po. This is coming from Regine Balmaceda of the College, Ma'am Regine Balmaceda of the College of Arts and Sciences. Good afternoon po. Since researchers use in vivo in processing qualitative data, would it affect the credibility of the analysis result if the researcher resorts to the use of mano-mano method, or not using any software to analyze the quality data?
Okay. Up to now, I have been resisting the use of ano to? Ano itong software? In vivo? I know na meron.
In vivo.
Alam kong merong ganong software. Pero ano pagdating sa ethnography, hindi siya masyado useful in the sense na you are dealing with a lot of data, pero iba-ibang ano niya. Mahirap ilagay lang sa isang anong tawag dito, sa isang database na mag-process nito. Yung iba-ibang cluster ng data na nakakalap sa ethnography ay maaaring baka kailangan kanya-kanyang approach ng pag-analyze. Halimbawa, I use textual I use documents. So mga ilang lang naman yan, hindi yan ganun karami na para ilagay mo pa sa software. Mano-mano would be the best. And the other thing, nung tinitingnan ko yung in vivo, kung anong ginagawa niya, it's basically the mano-mano thing that we do, except that dinigitize, sinestematize na. But the mano-mano approach to analyzing, halimbawa, interview data, basically it works the same way as the computer category. Data, reduction, and then categories, and then, thematic, mga ganyan. It's basically the same. So, ang ginagawa ng in vivo, basically kung anong ginagawa nung nagmamano-mano, siguro mas mahaba nga lang yung mano-mano, mas matagal. But basically, it's the same process of processing. Same processing. It's the same processing that happens dun sa data. Ako, minamano-mano ko pa rin kasi gusto ko, ako magde-decide kung saan ko ilalagay itong category na to. I wouldn't, hindi ako masyado kumpiyansa dun sa software na siya magde-decide kung saan kakategorize. Dahil lamang dun sa mga marker, di ba? May mga marker na nare-recognize ng computer. Nilalagyan ng mga marker yung mga ini-splice ng mga ng mga phrases. I'd rather but kasi I enjoy. Ini-enjoy ko po yung itong proseso na to ng going through all this mga data, raw data, and then trying to make sense of them. Ini-enjoy ko Ayokong mawala yun sa akin kasi bahagi sa akin yun nung tawag dito nung experience ng pag-research. Dealing with data, talagang you get a high. You get some kind of a high. Kasi nga sabi nga nila, the data are now talking to you. So parang ganyan. Okay lang. I have no issues about itong pero sa akin personally, I'd rather do it mano-mano. So yun po.
Ako naman
Ikaw, Ma'am Jo.
Out of necessity, kasi nung nandun ako sa, I was given the University of Canterbury Award for Doctoral Scholarship. No? But it only covered yung academic work. It did not cover my research expenses. So, ang ginawa ko, ako yung nagtatranscribe, ako yung talagang mano-mano, ako talaga lahat yung gumawa. And so it took me about 6 months to transcribe all the interviews, no? Talagang pagkagaling sa fieldwork, talagang minsan kasi yung mga interview 1 oras, 2 oras, etc. So mano-mano 'yon. At the time that I was through with the transcription, bigla namang inintroduce ng University of Canterbury yung in vivo. Kaya galit na galit ako kung kailan natapos
Kailan
na yun. saka sila biglang nag-i-introduce, tapos na ako, nag-a-analyze na ako, tapos biglang gano'n. But one thing is sure, no? Especially for the young researchers na sanay sa technology, probably it would help them. Ako, whatever helps is okay, no? For people like me, na medyo hindi ako masyadong techie, hindi ako techie savvy, mano-mano is also okay. Why? Because you actually, when you're interviewing people, you don't just record. You're actually noting down kung asan sila most passionate, no? And this is something that I learned from Fras Abaya, no? Yung anthropology of emotions, no? Where are, saan sila nagiging sobrang passionate? And that indicates to the anthropologist that this is something important. Titingnan mo yung facial expression ng nagsasalita, ano yung sinasabi niya. And I noticed nga, kaya nga na-establish ko yung trend na walang in vivo is because pagdating dun sa kaapihan, especially yung mga DWs natin sa Malaysia and Singapore, when they feel that they were oppressed, by their employers, they become very passionate. Nangingilid yung luha. Sometimes they cry, while they're telling you their story. And this is the reason why I know, even without in vivo, that this is something very, very important. Yung tao, the notion of tao, na hindi sila, kung tatuhin sila, the way they are treated is not like the treatment for human beings. No? So yun ang trending yun dun sa aking mga interviews. Although of course there are some, especially yung isang interview ko na na-publish sa Ateneo, yung sabi ng isang Pinay doon na titignan kanila magmulang ulo hanggang paa at sasabihin nila domestic worker. Bakit? Ano bang problema sa pagiging domestic worker? What is wrong, I use the translation kasi of course English yung gagamitin. What is wrong with being a domestic worker? And perhaps this is something that we can reflect on as Filipinos kasi yung tingin din natin sa mga kasambahay. Do you know that while we are fighting for the rights of the kasambahay, mga domestic workers sa Malaysia and Singapore, sa Pilipinas, hindi pa natin ipinapasa yung batas natin para sa kasambahay. At the time that we are protesting about the hanging of floor contemplation, wala naman tayong batas para protektahan ang mga kasambahay natin dito sa Pilipinas. And this is where I'm saying that, this is anthropology. Anthropology that challenges society. Anthropology that reveals the truth. At those are the truths that I discovered. That while I was doing my interview among the domestic workers, I realized na walang protection ng ating mga domestic workers dito sa mismong Pilipinas. So how can the government even lobby for a better treatment ng mga domestic workers kung dito sa mismong Pilipinas wala pang ipinapasa na batas?
Thank you very much, Manjo. And I think we don't have questions in the chat box anymore unless yung mga kasama natin sa Zoom would like to ask question, you can just raise your hand. Kung meron pong gustong magtanong, yung mga nasa Zoom. Wala na po yata. So,
the evaluation forms, the evaluation link is already being shown in the chat box. So please answer the evaluation. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So at this point, we are going to award the certificate to our resource speakers. Allow me to read the citation. This certificate of commendation is awarded to Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento in grateful recognition of his distinguished and invaluable service rendered as resource person during the Doing Ethnography Seminar Workshop held on July 15, thereby contributing immeasurably to the prestige and success of the event. Given this 15th day of July 2021, signed, Director Felipe Bernal Seso 3, OIC President, Director CHED Region 5. So we virtually award the certificate to Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento. Same certificate of commendation is awarded, of course, to our Vice President for Research and Extension, Dr. Josefina Socorro F. Tondo. All right, so we are still being joined by, nakita ko po si Sir Ellie and Ma'am Susana kanina. Thank you very much po. So please join us again tomorrow for the second day of this Doing Ethnography Seminar Workshop. We'll be having 2 modules. We have module 3 on indigenous people of the Philippines and by Maria Mangahas and Jessie Varquez. And we have module 4 in the afternoon, Village, Community, and Annual Cycle by Cynthia Zayas and RV Banyes. So please join us again tomorrow at 9. We'll start at 9 po. So may I request everyone to please turn on your video for the documentation, please. Our technical staff to please take the picture. All right, so smile. 1, 2, 2. Smile again for the second 1, 1, 2, and 2. And next is 1, 2, and 2. Okay po. So that's it. Our evaluation link is by module po, by module. So the evaluation link will be sent by our technical staff, the OV Press staff. And then what else, Ma'am Jo? Do we have any announcement po? Wala naman.
Make sure that you register per module because certificates will be given per individual module. Para naman yung hindi kayang i-attend yung lahat ng modules, will still get certificates. So pag umattend siya sa ngayong hapon, meron siyang certificate. And hopefully that counts sa NBC 461.
Yes, ma'am.
Alam ni Dr. Mon yan.
Okay po. Again po, please register every module, and then evaluate po for you to have the certificate. Right.
Another thing is I will be giving assignments after the module. I will post some requirements in the group chat. Ganon din si Dr. Mon, Doc Mon, kung gusto mong magbigay sa kanila ng brief assignments lang for exercise lang. Probably we can give it as a requirement to them para may isasubmit sila sa atin as part of this module. Okay, thank you.
Okay po. So that concludes our first day of Doing Ethnography Seminar Workshop. Again, I'd like to thank our resource speakers for today. Alright, we have Ellie Giab, Suyen Roldan, Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento, and of course, Dr. Josefina Socorro F. Tondo.
I have seen Dr. Maria Mangahas as well. I saw her coming at a certain point. So she will be giving the indigenous peoples of the Philippines bukas. Okay.
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, so hi ma'am. And to all the participants, our research coordinators, our deans and directors, to each and everyone, thank you once again, and mabuhay po tayong lahat. We're all waiting.
Thank you, Doc Mon. Maraming salamat. Wag mo kalimutan
yung pleasure. Salamat. At ako'y
collaboration natin nasa Katsu sa CNSC.
Ma-message na lang ako.
Sige.
Okay.
Let's collaborate. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you po. Thanks everyone. God bless po.